Post-it, app, to-do list, schedule. Have you tried everything, but it seems like nothing can organize your life? Right? It's because the tool doesn't matter much if you don't know yourself or how to apply it in a way that works for you. I developed a method that helped me a lot, and now I'm much more productive. Check it out in the first link in the description. Hey ADHD. All good. I'm Yuri Maya from ADHD Uncomplicated, and in this video I'm going to tell you the 19 symptoms of adult ADHD, the main symptoms based on my experiences and studies, and especially on the studies of American psychiatrist Ned Hallowell. Okay, but before we start, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel too, click on the bell, and also leave your comment down below, telling us what you thought, so we can chat a bit, okay? So let's go. So we can have a chat, all right? So let's go. The first very common symptom of adult ADHD is the feeling of low performance, regardless of the task. Okay, it doesn't have to be a boring task, no. Many times you're doing a task that you actually enjoy, and you, who have ADHD and have studied a bit more, might have heard someone say like this, "Wow, but you with ADHD, you should be really good at what you like, at that activity that brings you joy." And you know very well that it's not quite like that. Many times, even in that task, in that activity that you enjoy, you feel like you're stuck, like you can't move forward, you can't progress. It's like this. If someone asked you why you can't progress in that task, you would say something like, "Man, I just can't do it. It just doesn't work. I just get stuck." So this feeling of low performance, of feeling like you're falling short, is quite common in ADHD. Adult. The second very present point is the difficulty itself, organizing. Usually, people with ADHD, and of course, I'm not talking here of universal symptoms. No, there are many people with ADHD who don't have difficulties in school. For example, they can perform really well, flawless in what they like, without any kind of stumbling. These are behaviors observed in the average, in most people with ADHD, all right? But this issue of self-organization is very present and tends to be a chronic problem for those with ADHD. Since you were little, you've already had difficulty organizing. Mom has to stay on your case, Dad. The teacher has to get your attention so that you can get organized. Organize your space, organize your priorities, and be able to move forward. And in adulthood, it's no different. In adulthood, you already have your independence. You usually live alone. And even so, you have to constantly surround yourself with some kind of tool, of some kind of reminder, so you don't lose track of things, so you don't get sidetracked by other tasks along the way and lose focus on what's important for you to do. So, self-organization is also an important symptom of adult ADHD. By the way, the difficulty with self-organization is a major symptom. But before we move on to the third sign, I want to invite you, adult ADHD, to be part of the ADHD in Action Club. All the symptoms I mentioned here, we have tools, recorded classes, and new content every week for you to learn how to overcome each of these symptoms, all right? So, click here on the card, which should be appearing, or on the link in the description. And let's go, let's continue the video. The third point is the chronic procrastination of starting tasks. This is something very present in us. And as I said, it's not just the chronic procrastination of uninteresting tasks, but even those tasks that are interesting to you. Task, okay. It's not a hobby. It's not just turning on the video game to play. That really is a distraction. But even a task, something, a job of yours that you actually enjoy doing, you still procrastinate. Whether it's due to anxiety, you find it hard to say, okay, I have to do this task, but what's the first step? What do I have to do? What comes next? And this creates a cycle in your head, a certain anxiety, which makes it hard for you to take the first step. So this chronic procrastination of always putting things off, no, 2 o'clock, I'll start studying, no, 4 o'clock, I'll start studying. Then it's 8 o'clock at night and you still haven't opened the book. So if you, in fact, identified with this, leave a comment here talking about this item 3. All right. The fourth sign is the many projects you start simultaneously in your life. And this comes along with the difficulty you have in completing these projects. And this happens on both a micro and macro level, let's put it that way. Micro would be in your day-to-day life, meaning you even get organized, you made your schedule the day before, but throughout the day you start adding new tasks that weren't the priority at that moment, and that disrupts the flow of your day. Or even on a macro level, meaning you take on more than one job, you pick up more than one hobby, you start several YouTube channels, for example. You open several accounts on Instagram and now you want to start a channel for one thing, then a channel for another. You want to open a bar, then you want to open a boutique. Anyway, you often have this difficulty in having clarity about what you need to do. And you start many projects. And it usually comes along with this difficulty of maintaining, having consistency in them. Of course, there are people who are workaholics, and workaholics can be people who have ADHD and manage to handle multiple projects at the same time. But usually, this is a very common sign of ADHD. This difficulty, this overwhelming influx of activities, the struggle to be able to maintain them. The fifth sign is the tendency to say everything that comes to our mind, right? In other words, sometimes we don't stop to think about what we say, right? We gave the best answer. Usually we make more blunders than average. This happens even due to a certain immaturity of our prefrontal cortex, which is where our inhibitory control is regulated. Our cognition, our decision-making processes. So many times we end up saying things without thinking. Making off-topic comments. This is very common in children with ADHD too, who sometimes make a lot of comments, a lot of jokes in the classroom, and they don't realize it. Or if they do, it's already too late. So in adults, this becomes very evident in social awkwardness. Usually when you're already a bit hardened, when this is very present in your life, very striking, you already go into social situations feeling a bit tense, believing that at any moment you're going to say something silly. And then people are going to get mad at you, and often without meaning to, without any bad intentions, right? So this item is quite present in ADHD. The sixth sign is the frequent search for strong stimulation. Our brain is always looking for things that are more stimulating, even because of our low natural production, that is that tonic production, which is quite constant but weak in our brain. Makes it hard for us to engage, a lot of difficulty engaging in things that aren't interesting. So our attention is on a certain focal point, and any other stimulus that appears can easily shift it. If it's 10% more interesting, you can switch your focus really easily. So this abrupt change, this constant need of our brain to seek out more interesting things at all times, it's a strong characteristic of ADHD and is constantly linked to impairments. Whether it's social impairments like losing interest in a person or a conversation very abruptly, right? It ends up being rude to the person in professional matters, in studies as well. So it's a trait that's quite present in ADHD. The seventh sign would be a complement to the sixth, which is intolerance to boredom. Whenever we get really bored because we're seeking that stimulation, we quickly jump into action to do something else, which also leads to impairments, right? Usually you get bored studying, for example, right? I don't think many people actually enjoy studying, waking up with that excitement and desire to study. So because it's a naturally boring task, you always look for something else, and it could even be your pen, right? Your pen even, or you have a pencil, you start sharpening the pencil until it's done, right? You play with the tip of the pencil, make a sculpture out of the eraser anyway. You run away from boredom just like the devil runs from the cross. So you're always looking for something that's more enjoyable, more interesting, and that takes you away from that immediate boredom. And it's almost something completely uncontrollable that just comes to mind and you really go for it. The eighth sign is the ability to get distracted, to disconnect from situations very easily. It's really about disconnecting. It's the kind, you start reading the book and then you're just staring at the paper. You're not even reading those jumbled words in front of you anymore. You just disconnect and your imagination goes far away. You feel kind of like a drifting boat. You find yourself floating in that kind of thought, in that situation, and you're always having to come back to wake up and return to the physical world, to the present world. Let's put it this way. The ninth symptom is a strong presence of our intuition. And creativity, this isn't necessarily a positive point of ADHD, but a positive consequence. These are different things. Many people associate this with being like a superpower of ADHD, when in fact it's not. What happens is that many times when we face everyday problems to get through small tasks and activities, when you're suddenly at work and someone asks for your opinion, you immediately think with the ADHD mindset like this. All right, I'm going to make a presentation for the people here at the company, but I know that if I do it this way, people are going to be really sleepy, they're not going to enjoy it. And how do you know that? Because you're someone who has this kind of behavior. In other words, you're someone who has a low tolerance for boredom, which I just mentioned earlier. So you're going to think of creative ways like, all right, if I were watching this presentation or if I were reading this project, how would I talk about it differently? How was I going to come up with examples that would make it interesting? So our creativity arises from our own difficulties. So we learn to deal with ourselves, and as a consequence, usually we pass on to people our worldview, which is a perspective that needs to have creativity, that you need to be adaptable to get through the day-to-day. The 10th symptom comes from the difficulty we have in following established paths. This also comes from a natural difficulty that books and articles talk about the difficulty we have in doing things in a rhythmic way in predefined sequences or with many sequences. If you have to carry out a task and it has a lot of details, you end up getting lost or even giving up because it's really hard to memorize all of that. So many times this is also a symptom present from the other difficulties that we notice in our day-to-day. We come up with our own way of doing things. Maybe we create shortcuts, right? But we have a lot of difficulty in doing these rhythmic tasks, these rhythmic activities, and that can lead to setbacks. Yes, because depending on your job, you have to carry out all these tasks, right? So it's very important. Usually you carry a little sheet, a little list, right? Reminding you of that step-by-step. Many people there, work colleagues, already remember by heart how the step-by-step goes, how to carry out a certain activity, but you don't. You need to have that little list of yours, have your notebook, so you can always remember and not mess up on those points, okay? Don't feel guilty about it, okay? Many times people are embarrassed to open their notebook of notes, but it's better to open your notebook and use it as a guide to manage to do a job at least decently, with fewer mistakes than just relying on your memory and thinking that's enough. No, it's not. Use the tools you have at your disposal. The 11th symptom would be the impatience of ADHD. I really have fire. I have a hard time even just staying still in one place. If I'm talking to someone I don't know standing on a sidewalk, I can't just stand still. I keep moving back and forth. I walk around the person because I can't handle it. Since childhood, I've been this way. Now I'm more polished, but if I stay still, impatience arises. I must keep moving, fidgeting with my fingers. That impatience comes, that fire that just doesn't go away. I have to keep moving my leg. I have to keep fidgeting with my fingers, doing something along those lines. But of course, this doesn't just come from motor impatience, but from impatience with the situations themselves. So, when you're faced with a repetitive situation that you've already been through, you don't even want to experience it again. If you have even the slightest impression that something you didn't like in the past is going to repeat itself, whether it's an event, a situation, whatever it is, you already become quite impatient. You really don't want to. You already have an incredible aversion to it, and you even start thinking about giving up or not going at all. Anyway, this also comes from the situations you experienced in childhood. This low tolerance, in fact, for boredom, in other words, that impatience of the kid who has already studied math. They're having a hard time with math. For example, taking the case of someone who has difficulty with math and then they just don't want to open the book anymore. He has already put in so much effort in the past to learn that. And maybe it's not just about ADHD, but also about the teacher who didn't have a good teaching method, who didn't grab that kid's attention. He just doesn't want to anymore. It's like it creates a certain block and impatience even towards that type of content. So this also causes harm because you're going to have to break that so the kid can start studying again, or at least create a little bit of interest in studying that subject again. So whether in childhood or adulthood, the issue of patience in ADHD is very present, very strong. It really is a very noticeable sign. The 12th sign is impulsivity, not just in speaking, but in acting as well. Impulsivity. In making an unplanned purchase. Impulsivity. In wanting to solve a bunch of problems without thinking it through, making decisions, signing a contract without reading it. Carefully, without understanding it, without weighing it out. Whether that contract will be good for you or not, right? If that weird clause in the contract is going to harm you or not. And usually one thing I've learned is to never, in any situation in my life, I give my okay, my word right away. I always ask, no matter how advantageous the promise or the circumstance that comes my way is, I always ask for 24, 48 hours to think, even if I already have my yes or my no right on the tip of my tongue, I can't do that. I really have to give that benefit of the doubt and think more calmly. So this impulsivity in spending money, in acting, in doing things without thinking, in signing, in making commitments, that sometimes can be really bad for you, but you, in the rush to get it done, didn't think it through. That property you bought, but the interest rates were exorbitant. And you only realized this in the 3rd month when you couldn't afford to pay anymore. Anyway, sometimes you didn't even really want that property. Impulsivity, especially in actions, is quite present as well. The 13th sign is a constant feeling of worry, endless worry. You're always thinking about something, worried about something, and it usually comes well in advance. You have an important meeting on Thursday. Today is Monday, for example, and you're just feeling impatient. Are you nervous about that? You already anticipate the worst. What if the worst happens? And if you stop to think, and if you, talk to your wife, your girlfriend, your husband anyway, you'll calm down because you see that these thoughts, this feeling of guilt, it has no basis. Usually it's associated with things from the past, with difficult situations you went through in the past, the struggles of the past, but that don't necessarily have to repeat now. You need to have the clarity that these constant worries we tend to have don't always make sense. The 14th symptom is a constant feeling of insecurity in your life. In other words, you're very apprehensive about the future, your future, about what's going to happen. You're very afraid of instability because generally throughout your life, you've gone through many moments of instability. Instability in school, will you get expelled or not? Will you repeat a year or not, right? Social instability, will you be able to maintain that friendship or not? Generally, people with ADHD make friends more easily because they are communicative. But because of this difficulty in listening to others, sometimes, right? It's not that you don't hear, you hear, but you don't process it properly. Sometimes you forget what the person said. You might end up being seen as an unpleasant person. Some situations, social interactions, not all, but some. So this creates a certain feeling of insecurity, and this reflects in your adult life as well. So you seek more security than average. You might be a little more hesitant to take an important step. Even though you have impulsivity, when you have clarity about the risks, then you can be a little more cautious, precisely because of that little feeling of insecurity, that the ground isn't solid enough for you to take the next step. The 15th trait is the issue of unstable mood. This doesn't happen to all people with ADHD, but this constantly comes to me in the question box. People send me messages. In the social media inbox, why? Yes, this usually exists. It's a trait. Sometimes in the same day, ADHD can hit a tremendous mood peak. In a great moment of happiness, and suddenly out of nowhere, it comes with a certain melancholy, with a certain sadness. This also happens because of our difficulty in regulating serotonin, which is one of the neurotransmitters that isn't perfectly regulated in ADHD. And it's very much linked to impulsivity, but that's another topic. But we have to realize that there are several factors that can cause this. But if you have ADHD, have you noticed that sometimes you're really excited to go to a party or a social event, and then suddenly when you get there, it wasn't anything like that, or even the slightest thing that happens in the environment can change your mood. Others keep having fun, laughing, and sometimes you isolate yourself, stop talking. You just stay there in the corner having your beer, your drink anyway. It's like you disconnect, right? So people don't really understand this mood variation, but it tends to be quite present, yes, in many cases of people with ADHD. The 16th sign, I've already given some hints about it here, right? Which is the issue of restlessness, which is usually linked to the very trait of hyperactivity. Hyperactivity, the fact that you have a whirlwind of thoughts and motor activity is very fast. It's at this point that people usually agree that ADHD involves a kind of racing thoughts, of a thought that doesn't know when to stop. This has a lot to do with the trait of hyperactivity, but we know that the trait of hyperactivity, that child who has this trait, who is born with it, usually has it significantly reduced in adulthood, starting from 25 or even up to 30 years old, okay? It's not that young of an adult, but there, between 20 and 30, it tends to decrease a lot. And then after 30, the trait of restlessness tends to decrease. But it's always present. If you were a very hyperactive child in the past, right? In your childhood as an adult too, you also have this certain restlessness, you also have this abrupt change, right? In your reactions, sometimes without much explanation, right? Not even you understand what's going on. And that's a striking trait as well. The 17th trait is the tendency towards addictions. Also due to a matter of dopaminergic regulation, our mind, which seeks constant stimulation, anything that leads to a great stimulation has a strong tendency to make us addicted. This applies to anyone. So, from sugar, alcohol, gambling, pornography, shopping, there are people who are addicted to shopping. It's not just impulsivity. It's daily impulsivity. There all the time, they're swiping the card. If you give the card to the person, they'll go for it. So, all of this is affecting your day-to-day life. So, the tendency towards addictions, be careful. Everything that you notice is causing behavior that is getting out of control. Raise the red flag, at least raise the yellow flag. Seek help because you might be starting to get addicted. And addiction isn't just about drugs, whether legal or illegal. As I mentioned, foods, sugars, behaviors, pornography, shopping, all of this can be influencing you. And it's interesting that if you notice this signal, you should seek out a doctor, a psychiatrist, a neurologist, and especially a psychologist to guide you through this scenario. So, the 18th symptom of adult ADHD is chronic problems with self-esteem and self-image. Let's say, once again, that a person with ADHD goes through various challenges throughout life that many neurotypical people either don't experience or experience less frequently. This happens because of the very characteristics of ADHD that I've already mentioned before this item. But if you haven't been well supported in this, if you're not a child who was well guided by your parents, being told that there's nothing wrong with her, that everyone has their own struggles, a child who goes to the psychologist, whenever you understand the issue of your self-esteem, understands that despite the difficulties, she is a completely capable person. So, if this hasn't been well addressed, it can lead to low self-esteem in childhood, and it can carry over into adulthood as well. And it can lead to problems even like abusive relationships, right? And not just romantic relationships, but also abusive friendships where friends only call the guy with ADHD because he has a car, or they only call the guy because he tends to have a huge sense of altruism, paying the bill out of nowhere, right? Abusive romantic relationships too. An abusive boss who asks the guy to work overtime and doesn't pay, right? So the self-esteem of someone with ADHD does have an issue that needs to be addressed in the vast majority of cases. And if you're experiencing this, seek help. And the 19th symptom is distorted self-observation. It has a bit to do with the previous item, but it's about how you perceive yourself and your own performance in life. So, it's not just a matter of self-esteem, but it's also a matter of self-perception. So, for example, if a colleague did a project that turned out nice, and you do a project that is very similar or sometimes even better, you believe that your work doesn't have much value. You believe that you're not as capable as the other person, even when the evidence, the results show otherwise. Show that you are just as capable or even more so, because your contribution was just as good or better than your colleagues, right? So this difficulty of high value, it's a bit related to self-esteem, but that's how it is. You have to understand, that's right. When you can prove that you are really just as capable as others through your day-to-day activities, you also have to reward yourself. You have to, man. I'm awesome. I'm good. I managed to perform really well. In this activity here, that's it. You need to have a well-developed self-perception, and it's also a case of seeking a specialist, getting help if you're facing this, all right? So that's it, folks. These were the 19 main symptoms. Obviously, it doesn't happen to everyone. And even if one or another neurotypical person identifies with some of these symptoms, what defines a person, what defines that this symptom is a symptom of ADHD is precisely its frequency and intensity. In other words, these symptoms have to appear a lot and with a lot of intensity, with very striking and evident episodes. All right. And that's it. I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, comment down below what you thought of it. Don't forget to leave your comment and share it on your WhatsApp in ADHD groups of the people you think should watch this video. So, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, I'll see you later, and bye-bye. The professional life of someone with ADHD heavily relies on communication. How you behave at work or how others perceive you can be crucial for your professional advancement. The problem is that hardly anyone explains the best way to act in these situations until now. I'm going to explain how to take control of your professional life in the first link in the description.